This presentation describes the Missouri outside the hospital do not resuscitate order. To put this into context, we talk about 4 times to withhold CPR, according to American Heart Standards and most protocols. Obviously mortal wounds, rigor mortis, dependent lividity, and then finally the valid do not resuscitate or DNR form. It's that form that we want to talk about in this presentation. This form and the process has been in place for a couple of years, and it's described in Missouri Statutes, Chapter 190, as part of the overall EMS legislation section. As with many things in statute, the statute directs that regulation be made to provide further information and instruction, and the Department of Health's Bureau of EMS has provided these regulations. Again, these are also part of the rest of the set of regulations for EMS in the state. To be valid, the form should be this specific form. No other forms are valid, legally valid outside the hospital. Should be on purple paper or purple cardstock preferably. Any shade of purple is apparently okay. There's a couple of things. The person involved's name goes here, and then a patient representative, which we'll talk about the definition of that in a minute, can enter their name here. Attending physician signs here at the bottom. And then there's this whole revocation provision where the person can revoke this order, and it also speaks in the regulation about how the form can simply be destroyed. A couple of definitions, important points to mention here. In the instructions and the regulations, it speaks of cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and the point we want to make is that this counts for cardiac arrest or respiratory arrest. And cardiopulmonary resuscitation isn't just chest compressions, it also includes endotracheal intubation, any other advanced airways, any ventilation, defibrillation, or any medication. So the term CPR is used, or cardiopulmonary resuscitation is used to encompass the full range of treatments that we do for cardiac or respiratory arrest. And again, the key thing is that once the patient stops breathing, then this order is enforced. They don't have to actually be in full cardiac arrest. Respiratory arrest is sufficient to trigger this order to be enforced. Definition of a patient representative for this regulation and for this form is spelled out here very clearly. They're talking about a durable power of attorney for health care, and so the definition is fairly narrow. And this must be a formally designated patient representative. It can't simply be a family member at the bedside who's now saying, no, we don't want resuscitation, or yes, we do want resuscitation. In those cases, those communications do not fall within this regulation and the use of this form. So here's the instructions, part of the instructions that are on the back side of the form. A couple of key points. First of all, this form is for patients who have not been admitted to the hospital, and under COBRA EMTALA legislation and laws, when a person has not yet come to the emergency department, then this form can be valid. I do believe that hospital-based ambulance services under EMTALA face a particular dilemma in that once their paramedics are in front of a patient, whether they're in the hospital or not, particularly when they're in the patient's home, once that hospital-based paramedic makes contact, then as far as the EMTALA law is concerned, the patient has come to the emergency department. So there would be a question as to whether this out-of-hospital DNR form, the purple form, would have any validity in the case of hospital-based ambulance services. Secondly, the patient's representative or the patient can revoke this at any time, and so that's spelled out in the instructions as well. Again, it does not talk about family members at large. It has to be a specific person who has been designated as the patient's representative. Here's the rest of the instructions that are on the back of the form. The top part up here basically says this is a do not resuscitate order. It is not a do not care. So prior to respiratory or cardiac arrest, all therapy should be initiated and the patient should receive maximal care up until the point where a respiratory or cardiac arrest occurs. Second point down here is if there's any doubt about the validity, then full resuscitation should commence. The next point is that once this form is discovered or presented, even if CPR and resuscitation measures have been started, they should be withdrawn. And then it spells out down here below that there is no need to run a strip or do further documentation, and no medical control contact is necessary. Once the form is in place, it is acting as medical direction. On the Department of Health Bureau of EMS website, there's a document called Frequently Asked Questions. This is the first part. There are two parts to it. And these are some of the frequently asked questions that people had about this process when it first came out. And so what they're saying is that any other existing DNR form is still valid in that it still speaks to the patient's wishes. It just doesn't offer any legal protection. Down here it also reiterates what I've mentioned a couple of times about patient representative. It has to be a specific patient representative, and speaks about this term about a surrogate. And then here's again is the definition of a patient representative, and then mentions that there are instructions on the reverse side of the form, as well as available through the Bureau of EMS and on their website and by mail and through many other sources. More frequently asked questions talking about this need for it to be purple and how that can be worked out. And then, is this form valid inside the hospital? And the answer from the Department of Health is that would be up to the hospital. Suppose that there could be policies in place with hospital-based ambulance services that allow for this form to be honored once the patient has been admitted, or should that patient be in contact with hospital staff. So that may be the way around the EMTALA wording. The regulations allow for a medallion to be worn in place of or in addition to the purple form, and so the medallion is expected to be honored the same as the form. The one here on the right is the specific Missouri medallion, which would have the outline of the state of Missouri and then a purple stop written across it and the designation of Missouri out of hospital DNR. There is a specific vendor that is approved for that, and they also do them for Texas and for other places, and had a picture of that on the left. So if you find this on a necklace or a bracelet, this medallion carries the same weight as does the form. Similar to the medallion, this wallet card or pocket card identification card also carries the same weight, and so this would be something to look for in addition to or when you believe there may be the presence of the purple DNR form, but it isn't immediately with the patient. This wallet card carries the same weight. It must be this specific card that's described in the regulation and approved through the Bureau of EMS. So just to quickly review some of the key points, respiratory arrest does count once the patient has stopped breathing, whether their heart continues to beat or not, and they still have a rhythm on the heart monitor. This form becomes in effect. The term CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, includes the whole list of stuff that we do, not just chest compressions. We mentioned the question about come to the emergency department language that may be particularly of interest to the hospital-based ambulance service. We talked about how medallions and ID cards carry the same weight as the form. During transfers or anytime the patient is outside the hospital but maybe in home health care or something like that, regulations indicate that this form should be easily found. It should be on the first page of the chart, and they do allow for a photocopy or a fax. Any color purple ought to be cardstock, and it can be revoked by the patient representative if that is the person at the bedside when we arrive. That will be a key point for us, is to determine that that is actually the person whose name is on the purple form, and that they are in fact the patient representative and not merely any random family member. All the information from this came from the Department of Health Bureau of EMS. There's the link. You can just Google for Missouri OHDNR, and it pops up this link, and all this information is word for word with no interpretation from me from the Bureau of EMS website. So I hope this provides a good review or an introduction if you haven't seen or heard of this form. And if you have any questions, refer to the Bureau's website or contact us through the Training Bureau. Thanks for listening.